slides, you can feel comfortable covering yourself. I don't know why the front of you are so close to me, and don't take it personally. Really close. All right, there we go. I need space in case I'm tired. I can't teach. All right. Now we're starting class and inequality. This is something that's actually surprisingly difficult to teach to an American audience. This is really easy to teach almost anywhere else, but an American audience very frequently does not recognize the impact of class. And the reason they do not is because we describe ourselves ideally as a society where class mobility is important. And we look at everyone as having the ability to bootstrap themselves up, right? If you are poor, yes, maybe you had some bad things happen to you, but you, as an individual, you can succeed. This has to do with sort of the enculturation, dependence, and independence training kind of thing. We encourage in our society competition and aggression over cooperation. And the reason we do this has to do a lot with our family structure. So before we jump into this, there's one part of our family structure we didn't really talk about, which is the difference between extended and nuclear families. In nuclear families, which is the type that you typically think of yourself as having, mom, dad, kid, dog, right, maybe a couple of kids, right, it's the kind we see on television. That's actually usually a very specific kind of family, and usually falls into a very specific kind of class. And the reason for this is that it takes money to have a nuclear family. A nuclear family means that you rely on your own savings in times of need. If one of you dies, the family dissolves. It's actually extraordinarily unstable, and is something that we really strive for, even though it's lonely, because what it has for us is autonomy. We get to make our own decisions. You don't have to worry about what your dad thinks. You do what you want to do, right? And we see that as very attractive because we link that in with our own success. When we succeed as an individual. In other cultures, when an individual succeeds, they're succeeding on behalf of their family, right? They are part of something, not an individual. I mean, they're individual. They have names. They're not automatons of a family. But they see themselves as organic members of this unit, of this, in fact, giant kinship diagram, right? They're part of that. So in our culture, which requires mobility, right, we have to be able to move where the money is, because we're an industrialized nation and we have this capitalistic economy. We've got to jump where the money is. And we have valued money over kin for a very long time. If you're given a choice, stay in a town where your family is and be poor, or move on your own and be wealthy, we'll cry when we say goodbye to our families, but we are out of here, right? That's it. And we start learning that when we're really little. When you are in school and you get an award, right, they're recognizing you as an individual. Unfortunately, we know that right now we're going through a cultural change where we recognize that there may be some problems with this, encouraging this competition and encouraging this aggression. So we've done some things institutionally to try and convince everybody that, well, everyone's a snowflake, right? You've all been told by your parents how special you are. This is actually very different from the way we used to enculturate our children. Very, very different. We used to raise our children to understand the importance of being a member of this family. Now we raise our kids with the importance of understanding you will grow up and you will move out and you will be on your own. And obviously you can see how successful it is. Most of you are still living with your parents, correct? And it's okay. That's actually a good thing. It's kind of counteracting some of the problems we have. But we also gave every stinky kid a trophy too. So everybody was special. And I'm sure you recognize that line from The Incredibles, if everyone is special, then no one is. Right? That's true. That's absolutely true. I cannot tell you the number of emails I've gotten from students who are like, I missed a quiz. And I say, yeah, you did. Well, I want to take it. I'm sure you do. But that's not going to happen. But I had issues. Actually, as it turned out, so did I. And I want to hear yours as much as you want to hear mine. Let us both part ways and do other things now. And then literally I get back, but I had important things happening in my life. And your assumption when you send that is that I didn't. So you're like, hi, I'm special. Well, I'm special too. Well, now we're at a special impasse, aren't we? Aren't we all just special? Right? And so I've actually taken an active role now in trying to convince you that actually you're part of the cause. I think that we may get along better as a society if we start figuring out that we're all part of something. In Asian societies, you can actually see how important being part of the family is by naming. Think about, a lot of your experience extends to Mulan. All right, Mulan. Remember Mulan? As long as we're talking about gender and sexuality and all those other things, we did include a picture of Mulan. Mulan's name was Fa Mulan. Fa is her family name. She's from the family Fa. Her individual designation is Mulan. Right? Mulan's success or failure, the reason her family, her ghost family, sent the great stone dragon, oh, poor Mushu, after Mulan was not because they were worried she was going to get hurt. They were not concerned about that. What were they concerned about? Family name. She was about to shame everybody backwards. She was going to shame dead people, which you can only do in this kind of family structure where the family is the foremost part and then you can shame dead people. In our culture, we don't see it that way at all. Because when we succeed, we've succeeded. And our family is proud of us, but it is our success. Now, my mom will, when she's talking to her other old lady girlfriends, the old ladies will talk about how successful their children are, right? I have a friend who won a Nobel Prize because he's smart, right? And so my mom will say to me, and where is yours? You know, as it turns out, there's a reason that's a very prestigious award. They don't just hand them out to anyone. Well, if Jeremy can get a Nobel Prize, I'm sure you can. And then she's going to go, when he was a kid, he ate his snot. You didn't eat your snot. Yeah, well, apparently that may have led to the Nobel Prize winning. Maybe you should have just let me. And when I fail, and I have failed at many things in my life, right? Many things. When I failed, did I shame my family? No, my mom's doesn't talk about the failures to the old ladies, right? She doesn't mention the sheer number of times I have done absolutely stupid shit. She doesn't talk about that. But it's really my failure, right? It's my life. When Spencer was going to junior high, they had this thing they did where they divided the students into, we almost looked at it as like Harry Potter houses, right? They had Renaissance action teams. There was the gold team, and the green team, and the red team, and I forgot what the other team was called. Blue? That seems likely. So they were divided across grades. Right? There was, you could be in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. It was set up by last names. And at the end of the year, the team with the most points got a party. And what they did was, every time a kid got detention, an individual within that group, they would deduct points from that action team. I think some of you may have experienced the exact same thing, right? In his 7th grade year, no, maybe it was 6th grade, it was somewhere in there. He comes home and I say, okay, so which action team won? And he names not his team. He was in the gold team. And he says, we lost by 6 points, Mom. And I was like, oh my God, 6 points, that's terrible. He says, I got detention twice and we lose 3 points each time. Oh. Right, so he was like, I lost it for our gold team, it was me. me. Right, I was doing the whole, like, yeah, there's no I in team, dude. But the whole point of this exercise was to get you guys to work cooperatively with each other, to become dependent upon each other, right? To discourage competition. Like, they put you in a competition, so I'm not sure how this works. Then he comes home and he says, I can earn more points for my team if I do this challenge course. This challenge course, I had no idea why this was on a junior high campus. So it was like this giant telephone pole. There was a wire between the two telephone poles, so you would walk the wire and then zip line down. There was a bunch of other things you could do in between. It was way the hell up in the air. Now, mind you, I did not have an athlete as a child. I got a reader. That's all right. I like readers. And I didn't have to go hiking like my poor sister every time her son was like, I want to see the sunset on the top of the Hollywood Mountain. My sister would be like trying out there, I want to see the sunrise. She'd drive him out there, and Spencer would be like, I'd like a new Goosebumps book. Yes! I'm behind this plan. So when he says, I could do this and gain extra points for my house if you sign the permission slip. And I say, oh, no way am I signing that slip. It's never happening. And he was like, fine, I'll just ask Dad. I said, Dad's not going to sign it either. I know your father's going to be, his dad's captain safety monitor. No way. No way is this going to happen. He says, okay. About a week later, he gets in the car after school, and he is excited. He is delighted. He is full of energy. Right? And I'm like, what'd you do today? My mom settles in the raptor look of, you're about to get busted. I don't know what you did. I know you did a thing. And he says, I did the challenge course. Really? How'd you do that? And then he looks at me and realizes he's just fucked up, right? Because he asked me for a permission slip, and I said no. I know he asked his dad, and his dad said no. So he must have written his own damn permission slip, right? And I was like, damn it! What have you done, son? He says, I've made sure we're going to win. That's what he did. And I was about to be really angry, because clearly he had forged one of our names on this thing. That is bad. That is wrong. But then I realized he's trying to do this for his team, but he will individually gain fame for having done this. So it was still independence training. I want my son to succeed in society, which requires competition, but I don't want him to think he's special because he's entitled. So I'm sitting there literally in my head going, oh no, what am I going to do? And then I melted like a weak mother, because the kid was grinning from ear to ear. He was so happy, and I was like, damn it, Trumps. I really wish you hadn't done that. And he was like, but I did it. Okay. Please next time, let's just talk about it before you do that. He says, okay. Am I in trouble? No. And the whole time I'm thinking, yes, you're in trouble. I locked you in a box. I locked you in a box and put that box in another box. I'm going to put that box in another box and mail it to myself. I'm like, I'm going to hide you. Right, I'm going to ease my moment, right? This is how this is all going to work out. And ultimately I realized that this school was making a terrible mistake in doing this, because really they were encouraging individual success over the group. Because one individual could actually change the whole outcome. In some ways, they were preparing him for exactly this. Preparing him for the kinds of things that we experience as Americans. We are poor. By poor, we mean below a certain socioeconomic level. Who gets blamed? We do. Right? Well, we'll get into it a little bit more later when we start talking about the culture of poverty. This concept that there is a culture that goes along with poverty, which we really should have seen completely blown out of the water in 2008 when suddenly lawyers and bankers were homeless. That should have stopped it. It did not. We definitely have that very same thing If you are broke, it's because it's your fault. Or maybe you didn't have all the chances, but you should have grabbed what chances you could. So it becomes this sort of weird spiral. Okay, move to the first slide. So if we define class, what is class? We're going to be looking at a system of power that's based on wealth, income, and social status. This is actually important too. It's not just about how much money you have. We have names for people who have a bunch of money but have not yet reached the social class. We call them nouveau riche, right? Those are the new rich. Corona was considered one of the centers of that for the Inland Empire. Because in Corona, we suddenly had all these people who had all this, we're going back 15 years, but it's still happening, right? That's why the houses in Corona are so much freaking bigger than they are here, right? The people in Corona had all this money, but we all recognized that they lacked was class. And we didn't mean like class in terms of economic class. Nope, they were doing fine economically. They lacked any pretension or any attachment to a social class we would consider upper class. Now, all of you were born into a class structure, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing that there is, it's not inherently bad that there is class structure. There is, and it is almost inherently, not quite natural. We certainly will talk about cultures where this doesn't entirely exist, but it's very much a part of the job. So, how many of you are middle class? Right. Are you middle class because you were born into a middle class, or because personally you earn between $45,000 and $180,000 a year? Oh, it was your parents, right? Because you were born in a middle class, so even though you're not making that money, you're still middle class. Interesting, right? We see ourselves as remaining in the class. So even though you personally are earning jack shit, even when you're working hard for, if you're really lucky, 10 bucks an hour. Most of us a little less, right? And you're working your ass off for minimum wage or just slightly better, and you're below the poverty line, but you are middle class. Well, why are you middle class? It's just something about you, yes? It's inherent to your birth, yes? Yes. It's in the way you speak, the way you dress, the car you drive, the way you hold anything, right? Your conversations, all of that. It's all about appearing to be middle class at the very least. Part of the reason you're in college is to afford you the opportunities of the middle class, right? So it's this very vague thing. It isn't all about wealth. Because here, you're like, well, no, I don't have the wealth, but I have the social status. You don't have the wealth, you don't have the income, but you have the social status. Huh, okay. So we look at class mobility, by the way, as one way. You can pull yourself up. And if you experience you're a lawyer and suddenly you're unemployed, well, that's okay. You'll go back. That's a temporary condition. That's what we said. I have a friend who was a stockbroker. He is now an actual circus clown. He still thinks of himself as upper middle class. And he lives in a warehouse with 11 people and is a circus clown. I'm like, Kevin, dude, love you. You are a circus clown, dude. And he's like, yeah, I'm doing what I love. That makes me middle class. Well, not exactly, no. We have these great success stories we love, right? Pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. The Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates of the world, right? The Mark Zuckerberg. Well, he wasn't poor to begin with, okay? That's the first start. But we have those stories of these people with great success. I worked for the guy who invented cable. He was poor. He sold tires that were already used to other people who were not so picky about how used they were. And he built an empire, right? And it was all part of his class mobility. And he was rich. Oh, God, he was rich. And he very much he was a nice guy, very nice guy, bow ties every day. Kind of looked like Colonel Sanders. He was the nicest man. And his kids were nice too, but they definitely grew into, they were always rich. And they have some attitudes that come with always being rich, right? That some of those attitudes we think of as being horrible, right? I watched him, okay, so I dated the son briefly, I will admit. Okay, so we went to a very nice restaurant where they knew him by name. We sat down, and he was wearing like sweatpants and Crocs. And I was like, and he says, well, they know me here. And I'm like, yeah, but you're kind of dragging down the environment for everyone else. Everyone else, this is a big deal dinner to them, as opposed to you needed somewhere to stop. You're kind of screwing it up for everyone else. And he was like, well, I don't care. They're not important to me. I see. He also wanted 15% tip. And I was like, and actually reached into my purse, took out more money, put it on the table, and I said, I'm sorry, you a little short? And he was like, well, that's what the service was worth to me. And so the whole way back, I'm like, do you have any idea that service doesn't even make minimum wage? This is what happens. They don't make all those tips. And I give the whole blah. And class inequality and the whole thing. And yeah, we didn't date again for about 6 months. Because he just sort of didn't see it. Now, of course, these sort of extremes that we see in our own class between the very rich and the very poor is comparatively recent in American society. If we go back to the time of everybody gets here, everybody had just about the same amount of nothing. Then, as we hit the colonies, we start also seeing some differentiation in wealth, but it actually wasn't as extreme as you might think, until we start talking about indentured servants, slaves. It was basically, you have essentially two classes of people. In fact, our founding fathers didn't want anyone to vote who didn't have land because they felt like they weren't invested. And they actually felt like that was an okay decision to make because the vast majority of people owned land. They, of course, didn't go with that plan. Thank you. So, if we look at societies without this system, we call them egalitarian societies. Egalitarian societies are societies where there is no differentiation within the culture between haves and have-nots, because there is no such thing. Everybody has, or probably really doesn't have, the same thing. But that doesn't mean that everyone is equal to everyone else. This means every man is equal to every other man. Every woman, mostly equal to every other woman. She may be married to someone who's a better hunter or something. Every man is equal to every other man, and every woman is subordinate to them. So they typically in egalitarian societies, you have this sort of motto, a poor man shames us all. Right? So everyone sort of pitches in together. Now your book way oversimplifies this. This is the way your book describes it. If a hunt fails or a crop fails, then everybody can bond together. And for the most part, they will, except that if you as a hunter perpetually fail, you will find that no one will support you. They actually practice something that is not listed here in egalitarian, particularly hunter and gatherer society, something called optimal foraging theory. Optimal foraging is, I will share with good hunters. I will share with you because if my hunt fails later, you will share with me. So you don't share with those who don't have a likelihood of returning that. That would not be the way to go. So typically we see hunters actually sharing predominantly with other successful hunters. So while every man is equal to every other man, that doesn't mean they're going to take care of everyone equally within their society. The book makes it sound a little more idealistic, because it was definitely written from a Marxist point of view. So the kind of sharing that they do, they term reciprocity, and there are 3 different kinds of reciprocity. There's generalized reciprocity, balanced reciprocity, and negative reciprocity. Generalized reciprocity is sort of a pay-it-forward kind of idea. Generalized reciprocity, I give you a thing and you give it back at some point. Probably around the same amount, but it's generally the amount is not calculated correctly. In balance, it's specified when the return is going to happen, and the amount is specified as well. And in negative, the person's trying to get the better of the deal. So in negative, for example, a guy trades a Jeep for a bunch of blankets he knows have been infested with lice. So he gets the Jeep, the guy gets the infested lice. He knows he's trying to take advantage, and he probably is. So that's negative reciprocity. Negative reciprocity is unfortunate because reciprocity is about how we keep our relationships going, right? Even in our market economy, we have certain expectations about economic exchanges having some sort of equality to them. I have a friend who bought a refrigerator 3 days before Thanksgiving, about 4 years back. And he buys this refrigerator, they deliver from Best Buy. They deliver the refrigerator, and he gets a bunch of food, he puts it in the refrigerator, he comes home from work and the refrigerator's dead. All the food is spoiled. Brand new refrigerator. So he calls Best Buy, and they will all not only not replace the refrigerator before Thanksgiving, which he is finally throwing the Thanksgiving feast. They won't replace the groceries, they won't replace anything, and for a while there they wouldn't even replace the refrigerator. What we all did is, because we have this idea that these exchanges should have some sort of equality to them or some sort of understanding, right? It will work for this long. That's part of the agreement. It will work for this long. We all boycotted Best Buy and wrote nasty letters. And then eventually Best Buy made it right, at which point we were like, okay, that's fine. So I'll give you a different example and see if you can place it in here. I had a best friend. Oh, there's nothing worse in the English language than the words ex-best friend, right? We all know the best friend breakup is worse than any boy breakup could ever be. It's sadder, it lasts longer, it's more vicious, it is horrible. But yes, I have an ex-best friend. But when she was my best friend, we became best friends through adversity. We had kids in the same preschool, and she left her husband, and I hadn't left mine yet. So she left hers, she moved into an apartment, and I helped her move into an apartment, and about 2 months later she calls me crying because she's worried because they're going to turn off all of her lights because she can't pay the bill, and they're going to turn off her gas, and oh my God, how could she have ever left? The guy was horrible, right? So she was like, oh my God, maybe I can never actually leave, I'll never be free, and I was like, shut the hell, you won't be, you know. I will save you. So I pay off her bills. I pay the electric, I pay the gas, I pay her phone. It came to about $300. About 6 months later, I leave my husband. I'm on my own for the first time in like 10 years. And I have a 5-year-old. And they're going to turn off my lights, and they're going to turn off the gas, and their phone is in serious jeopardy. And I call her and I'm crying, and I'm like, I am unsuccessful at this. And she goes, no, I will handle it. She handles my bills, which were about the same in amount as the bills I handled for her. About every 6 months, we would switch back and forth between which one of us was having the trauma, right? Which one of us could not make those ends meet. And for 5 years, we did this. Back and forth, about every 6 months. I introduced her to the guy she's now married to. He didn't want to date her, and I made him. I harassed the shit out of him until he dated her. And once they started dating, she says to me, you know, did you ever think that we were just best friends because we were both in trouble? And I said, no, that thought actually hadn't occurred to me. And she goes, yeah, well, I'm not in trouble anymore. Right, and I was like, and she said, well, you know, you're kind of crazy. Well, yeah, I mean, but I'm usually crazy like, oh, that's the lampshades a hat. You know, not so much I'm going to stab you. And she was like, and I just don't think we should be friends anymore. Right. I know. And at this point, she's got a cell phone that's on my bill, like all this stuff. And I'm like, all right, all right. Well, I didn't take it as well as I'm taking it right now. At the time, I was like, yeah, bitch. And then I threw her house key out on 10. I mean, I did have a moment of, there's nothing so horrible as a best friend breakup, right? At one point, she chucked the cell phone at my head, hit me, and the cell phone, she hit me hard enough to bust it open. But the last person who had paid someone's bills was me. I had paid hers. That was the last way it went. Now, we call this generalized, balanced, or negative. You would say negative, but it really isn't. Because nobody intended to get the better of anybody else. Our relationship busted up for other reasons, right? It wasn't about money. Our relationship busted up because of boys. And I am proud to say we can now be in the same room since last year. We can be in the same room. A friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours died. And at the funeral, I went up to her and said, I still remember why we're mad at each other, but this is kind of ridiculous. One of us is going to die, maybe both of us. And I just don't want to die still being pissed at you. And she was like, well, I'm fine. And she goes, well, I didn't think about you. And I would, what I'd like to do here is bury the hatchet and not in each other's heads. So we have all the same mutual friends because I introduced you to all of your friends and your husband. So we're going to see each other, let's just be nice. And she was like, okay. And then there was a party for someone and she invited me to the party, and I have to admit, this is what I did. I stood right by her during the entire party since I was a guest in her home. So every time she's trying to ignore me, I was like, so this is lovely. Who did you get this from? Oh, there's your daughter. She's just adorable, isn't she? So how's your mom? How's your brother? And she's just like, away. Right? And I'm like, oh, what lovely shoes you have. And I wouldn't go away. And my husband the whole time in the corner is like, oh my God, stop. And I was like, what? He said, you promised to bury the hatchet. And I'm like, I am. I'm making friends. He's like, you know exactly what you're doing. I'm like, I know. Because you know what I'm doing? I'm making all of the rest of our friends watch how very nice I'm being while she's not being nice. Like, we're 5. We're a little over 40. And we're behaving like we're 5 years old. And we still do this. What I did not do, though, was ask her for money. Because it was generalized responsibility. I wouldn't have asked her for the money. Wouldn't have. So there's a difference between the types of exchanges that we have, and they are very important. Now, we have a thing in our culture we do that we would all swear if asked by aliens is general reciprocity. But in reality, it's not that at all. Let us talk about Christmas. Oh, Christmas. Oh, it's not the gift, it's the thought that counts. Right, we all know that is bullshit, right? Absolutely, Christmas is a very fine example of, within our culture, generalized reciprocity. I'm sorry, balanced reciprocity. Very much it's balanced reciprocity. Okay, I'll give you an example. I have a friend, a very dear friend, and 10 years ago, she gave me a present. I had made like a basket of candles and lotion or something because I was poor. And then she shows up and she's got a gift for me, and she buys me a $125 gift certificate to Glen Onion. So the next year, I know, what do I have to do?
Agreed.
I have to reach her to the $125 level. Now, the only people who are at $125 level are my direct family. And then by the time we cross the 25 part, that's really just my kid. Right, once we pass the $100 mark, my kid gets that. No one else gets that. Not my friends. My friends is much less. And I have a lot of friends. And so I give her a gift certificate to Sephora, which she loves, for $125. She gives me, funny, a gift certificate to Sephora for $125 and a dress and some jewelry. The following year, I think that's it. I will it. I'm going to $200. I give her to Glen Ivy. No, Burke Williams. Burke Williams. I like it better. She produces a Coach purse, not an outlet Coach purse. You can tell the difference, right? She produces a Coach purse, and at the time, a little PDA tablet we used to carry those little that went in it to help me organize my day. Now, she was a bartender. She made stripper cash. She's beautiful. She made, I mean, like, she could make $1,000 in a night, no problem. And so she lived at home and was just like, the way I saw her was money just sort of shot off of her body as she was walking. And while I love Amanda, I love her to absolute death, I was like, okay, we have to stop. Luckily enough, she had training in anthropology, and I was like, look, I understand what we're doing here is Christmas, balance, reciprocity, and actually what we're doing here is something called MOCA, weirdly. We are one-upping each other in this game, and we cannot do this because I cannot continue. I have to stop, I can't afford you. And I don't want us not to be friends anymore because I can't afford you. And she was like, okay, understood. Now we give each other gifts we made. Right? And I'm like, that's better. Let's do the gifts we made thing. It's the best gifts, right? Plus, I make cool shit. I'm not gonna craft you a paper Santa. Like, if you're into steampunk, I will make you awesome gauntlets or a cool leather top hat with gears or something you can see inside or whatever. Or maybe I'll make a wooden pen and pencil set that will all match and have a matching case. Like, I get serious about it. I do not fuck around about making gifts. And it costs money. It costs a lot of money, but what it costs more is my time. And you guys know I'm a busy person, so I'm giving them something huge. One of my friends, though, last year says to me, I'd actually rather have the time that you spent making it with you. So every time you're about to sit down and craft me the present, call me and have me come over. And I was like, all right, I haven't. It just happened. Because I'm like, look, I'm home. I love you. You're not about it. So these kinds of relationship issues can make or break people's ability to access resources. It's really important. So in egalitarian societies, it wants to create and maintain, I should say, and maintain relationships. Once somebody does something for you, you're obligated to do something for them, right? You guys all know this. You've all experienced it. All of you have done some sort of, like, 1 year you gave someone something worth, $5 or $10, and they gave you a fabulous gift, and you were like, right? You know exactly how long you have to fix that problem. How long is it? 1 year. Right? You have 1 year to fix it. That's it. So, in egalitarian societies, this is no different. And it's how they maintain relationships. You're indebted to do something for them. So if somebody shares food with you, you are going to have to share back. But because of this, you don't end up with a lot of differences between individuals. And when you have individuals who do manage to amass something, almost all the societies have a leveling mechanism, something they do that evens it all out. a big party that increases their personal status, but actually gets rid of all the wealth. Like that kind of thing is really common. Okay, so you may get more respect. That doesn't mean you have a higher status, but you may get more respect. Maybe you're a really good hunter. Maybe you're the guy who makes the best flutes. Or maybe you're the most charismatic speaker. That's another way you could gain some sort of higher status, become a big man. So we call this type of status an achieved status. They have achieved or demonstrated some sort of proficiency or above proficiency in a skill or some sort of life event. The other kind of status is ascribed status. These are the kinds of statuses you can be born into. We'll talk about caste at the very end. Now, this isn't entirely true. An ascribed status can include things like universally ascribed status. Everybody recognizes that there's boys and girls. Everybody recognizes that there's a difference between a child and an adult. Right? And in most egalitarian societies, they'll have men's societies and men's huts. So they are dividing based on being men. So they are dividing based on an ascribed status. But they don't have the idea of classes that you move among. So ranked societies or stratified societies are societies where there are differences between individuals. And of course, there are different ways you can get there. In some societies it's ascribed, in others it's achieved. And you may have greater access to prestige than someone else from the ability to produce. If we start kind of basic, ranked societies, now by basic I don't mean hierarchical, I mean in number of people, fewer number of people. We may have something called a chiefdom or a chief, where you have one guy who is nominally in charge. In those societies, though, typically he still grows the vast majority of his own food. He gets something called tribute, though. Tribute is when people grow a little extra and they give it to him in return for him leading the way. Typically, the position is hereditary. Typically, you become chief because your father was chief before you. They tend to have some of better quality access to food and better shelters, slightly bigger. In chiefdoms, where you have multiple chiefs that work together in some sort of polity, you may see luxury goods coming from the outside that are being given to the chiefs. In return, chief responsibility is to oversee the political and social welfare of the tribal members. So if there's a fight, if Lisa and I had to go before the chief, he would sit down and he would mediate the argument and come to a decision about what we are to do, right? If someone were to cheat on someone else's, on their husband, or with someone else's husband, the chief would come in and actually mediate what punishments are to be sent out. There's a great old ethnographic film called Witchcraft, a monkey years old, and it's about this system they use for judgment or social sanctions, which is called, they use a bene, which is a poison, and they go and they use the poison oracle. So there's a guy who poisons a chicken while asking the chicken a question. And he phrases it so if the chicken dies, it comes out one way. If the chicken lives, it comes out another way. And you actually watch this couple who's been accused of adultery. He poisons the chicken and he says, did he see her naked? Did he have sex with her? And the chicken dies, right? It's a poor little chicken, right? So they have other oracles they use, like the termite oracle. So you drop a piece of wood and the termites eat it, and then you read the termite oracle. They have a lot of ways of finding out the truth. Is your question? No, just me. Okay. So the chief will then listen to the poison oracle and then mediate based on that. And in the sad story that we watch in this documentary, the couple has a fat chicken, and the chicken does die. But the chicken doesn't always die. Co-wives often have problems. Remember we talked Monday about polygyny? Yeah, especially when they're unrelated. You get a bunch of women who are all married to the same guy. Most guys who live in this situation will tell you that this is not a happy way to live. Like, I know American men are all like, I would have 5 wives. No, you wouldn't. You would not want this. That's 5 women who are pissed at you all the time. And when women live near each other, they cycle together. So all 5 of your wives are having their period at the same time if they're not pregnant. Good God, run for your life. Right? Most men who have multiple wives describe it as a burden, an absolute burden. And this guy's got 2 wives, and they're clearly mad at each other. And so he thinks that one of the wives is making the other wife sick because all the sickness is because of spiritual illness. And so he makes the other wife spit water because the chicken did not die. And so the chicken did not die. Say the first wife would die. That's the question. Is my first wife going to die? And the chicken does not die. The first wife is not going to die. Take the chicken, poison, and say, is my other wife causing the problem? That chicken dies. Oh, yes. So really what's actually happening is the person is looking at the social situation, figuring out what's happening, and then administering more or less poison to the chicken based on the social conditions, and the chief will act on it. So chiefdoms is when you have this sort of regional polity, which is this political unit, if you will, and it can be organized under a single chief, or you may have multiple linked chiefdoms. If you have multiple linked chiefdoms, you usually have lesser chiefs, a major chief and lesser chiefs. It's kind of a bummer to be the major chief because the lesser chiefs are always trying to figure out how to become the big chief. So it's usually for life, it's usually hereditary, and it's supposed to unite people in times of trouble. So if there's an incoming danger, you can unite all the chiefdoms together. They're actually nation state. They're much more complex than that. Yeah, most Native Americans call themselves tribes, or actually not tribes at all, they're nation states. Yeah, a tribe is actually a temporary condition. So you have bands of hunters and gatherers, or you have like 25 people, and there's no political authority there at all. If in a band somebody says, I don't want them, you can try to convince them, you can be charismatic, but that's the best you can do. You don't have to legitimize your force, you can't make them do anything. When we start having outside disasters like wars coming in, invaders, or even famine, you'll start seeing these groups come together in an emergency temporary situation where there will be a council of the most charismatic or the oldest people. And that would be a tribe, because somebody has to be in charge. But in this case, it can be somebody or somebody and then several small somebodies. It's like levels of bureaucracy, if you will. In most chiefdoms, if you have a problem, you can walk right over to the chief's hut. It may take you a little while, a few hours, but you walk over to the chief's hut and you tell the chief what your problem is, and he listens. Or maybe there's 2 levels of bureaucracy. You tell the dude who tells the chief. Right? That's it. 2 levels. Like imagine right now you're trying to go to the chief of your particular chiefdom. Barack Obama, right? If you wanted to do that, you have to like, you can't, we've already learned apparently crossing the White House lawn is not the way to talk to the bank. Yeah, well, I'd like to point out that the last guy I went through was taken down by 2 Belgian Malinois. Just like German Shepherds is skinnier. He's actually going to jail. His actually #1 crime is that he kicked a federal dog. Really? He's in more trouble for kicking a dog than he is for trying to kill. Yeah. They didn't hurt him. They just grabbed him by his clothing. He freaked out. That's all they do. Who's the dog lover? All right. So obviously these are pretty unstable because you end up with these, they get a lot of wealth and they have to maintain their status, but you get other folks who decide that's who they want to be. All right. Redistribution is different than what you recognize as, redistribution, you actually know this. Taxes are a form of mandatory redistribution. You pay taxes. So funds, goods flow into a central place, and then they're sorted, counted, and reallocated. If you have a sufficient amount of surplus, right, where you have a lot, you're going to definitely see government. You see government when you have enough surplus that you can actually have somebody in charge who doesn't have to grow their own food. Somebody whose job it is entirely to be in charge. That becomes their full-time job. And when we hit that, we get state level, right? Where there is somebody who that is entirely controlled by that chief or that leader of some rank, and then they're panned out again. And the reason we do it is it results in a better quality of living for all of us, right? The idea is you pay in, everybody's okay. Now, obviously, there are some real conflicts with this within our own culture because we don't do a level. Not everybody contributes 15% of everything we do, or 10% of everything we do, or 25% of everything we do. We stack it, right? The people who are poorer should contribute less, and the people who are richer should contribute more. And this is one of the reasons the Republicans freak out because they're like, just because I'm successful doesn't mean I have to give you more of my success, right? That's kind of the line underneath the Tea Partiers. That's why they keep trying to make the Atlas Shrugged movies. For those of you who don't know, Atlas Shrugged was a book written by Ayn Rand, and it was basically crucifying the idea of both taxes and capitalism, free market capitalism, that it was that we never really had it, that it should be true free market capitalism, and we should not take more from the wealthy because they were successful, and all of that, and it's very, very. The next book was called The Art of Being Selfish. That should give you an idea of what she's like. But the Tea Partiers love her, and the very first movie of Atlas Shrugged, which was 3 movies, was produced by Lionsgate. And the second one they wouldn't do it anymore because it became Tea Party agenda, so they literally homemade the second movie. And they're trying to kickstart a campaign right now to make the third. Because her story does sound very compelling. This idea that redistribution is inherently unfair. Now, I will admit, I do not like this system every April 15th. Right? Every April 15th, I'm like, I don't want to do this. But what do I want? I want to be able to drive to my home and have all of the streetlights work. I'd like to be able to drive and actually have passable roads. I want to get mail, although that's not paid for by taxes. I would like to make sure that I'm safe. If I'm in trouble, I'd like to be able to call for a small RV. Right? All of those things I need to pay for. I sent Spencer to public school. Right? Those people need to be paid for. And yeah, I'm not sending you to public school anymore, but those people are still need to be paid for. You're in public school. I don't know if you know this. It costs $4,700 per class for every seat you sit in. The government pays the vast majority of that for you. But that's what the actual cost is to the university, the college tax. So, you know, it's kind of a big deal. We are all in sort of state support system. Where does it come from? People like us. We often, as the middle class, get really, really upset because the people below us pay less than they should, and the people above us pay less. Wait, what? Warren Buffett paid a smaller tax bill last year than his secretary. You know, his secretary, who makes, of course, less than $100,000 a year, normal working secretary. Warren Buffett, paid less actual dollars in than she did because of the tax breaks we have for wealth. Now, why would we do that? I know all of us in this room are having trouble understanding why we would do that, right? Because we're unincented. But you want those people to stay. You want those people to continue to contribute to the economy, so they have to find a benefit to them to do so. And an economy without any kind of economic surplus is actually in kind of weakest position, right? Who do we owe the most money to? China, right? Actually, by the way, China is the #1 economic world power at the moment, just so you know. You're no longer #1. we are number 2. What I want, I'm like, well, you know, it turns out with number 1 comes a whole lot of cost, like paying for the vast majority of the UN comes from number 1. And we're not number 1 anymore, China pony up. Right, like a lot of the world aid stuff that comes from the number 1 country. It just says number 1 economic country. It turns out not us anymore, China pay up. I'm perfectly happy to be number 2. It turns out it costs a lot less to be number 2. So, this is an example of a form of redistribution that has nothing to do with taxes, but has everything to do with protection. Okay, so the clock here, if I say this right, I'll have to get it first. This word has a glottal flick in it. It's quack-butyl. So it's, as soon as you hit that K, there's a click. So quack-butyl, and it's a back click, not a side click. So the quack-butyl are in the Pacific Northwest. They were studied by Boas. They still exist. They were a native tribe. They were a fishing community, which means actually that unlike any other wild food collectors, all other hunters and gatherers are egalitarian. They were not. They were stratified. Fishing cultures, even though they are depending on wild resources, are actually quite stratified. So when an individual would start gaining a ton of wealth, one of the things they would do to display this wealth and then distribute this wealth is by having a potlatch. So a potlatch is a really big party where goods are given away. And if they're not given away, they're destroyed. In fact, actually, in modern day potlatches, they will burn money. Modern day potlatches actually look suspiciously like a gangster's paradise. Because they still occur now. And when you come as a guest, you could end up with an iPad or whatever is sexy at the time. And iPhone 6s will probably be this year's thing. Or a Hummer. You could end up with a Hummer. You could, I mean a car. You could end up with, they have a particular fondness for one brand of clothing over another. The year was FUBU, and we laughed. So they'll give away these very expensive things. Now what happens if you throw a party like this and nobody comes? You're really screwed because remember obligation and reciprocity? They give this huge party to you. They give you these gifts. You're obligated to come to their defense in the event somebody attacks them. If you throw a party like this and nobody comes, you have just put like the open season sign on yourself. Right? Oh, that's fine. Everyone can come get you. So these things get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And yeah, now they burn money. It's pretty amazing. So what Boas noted was that everybody who did it increased their social status. Even though their wealth obviously depleted from the event, they increased their social status. There is a classic film in Anthropology that I wish I had time to show you. If you're interested, I will definitely send you a link because I have it streaming at Cal Poly. It's Anka's Big Mocha. And it's the Papua New Guinea version of potlatch. It's called mocha. And it's great. I feel really bad that you're leaving a culture and anthropology class without having watched it because it's kind of a standard. So we use this though as a classic example of redistribution that's not necessarily based in government or based in taxes, but becomes a leveling mechanism. Which of the following is a type of society that's based on the sharing of resources to ensure success and quality? And we're going to do some theory. All right, you with me? Let's start with Karl Marx. So, I'm sure for some of you this is not new. For some of you this is total review. For others this may be the first time you've ever heard of that. So Karl Marx, who's that guy up there in the corner, this is probably the most famous photograph. He was born in 1801. And you start noticing there's a difference between class and equality. And there's a big difference between the haves and the have-nots actually in Germany. So during this period, we start seeing the Industrial Revolution at its height when it was really bad. You were really poor or really rich, and the really poor had a really short lifespan. So he starts noticing things are really becoming problematic, particularly where factories are, because in factories you have workers who did not own their work. So that's what he notices when he says, hey, this has never happened before. We've never had a situation under which an entire class of people do not have access to the end result, do not have access to their own work. So he described two classes, the bourgeoisie, who were the upper class, and they owned the means of production, the way of making stuff. And then we had the proletariat, who were the working class, and they had they made the production. They did not have the means or the modes of production. So these are the guys that have everything, the raw materials, the factories, the money, all the things to make the goods for sale. These guys don't have any of those things, but are the labor, right? They themselves are the labor. And what he says is that's the only thing they can offer the economy is their labor. So we still see this, even though we have this whole group of folks who we consider middle management. And if you look at Marx's ideas in its simplicity, rather than looking at each detail and trying to apply it, it makes more sense. And he did end up inspiring a bunch of scholars because, actually, in fact, he actually inspired whole groups of people in a way of life we call it communism. However, one thing we should know is that it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because what Marx says is, okay, as soon as you get to the state level society, so as soon as you get past chiefdoms, you have a whole class of people who don't work. And then you have a whole class of people who are owners, and they own all the stuff, and they also don't work. So you end up having to have these workers whose quality of life sucks. And so we should not have this situation in which we have these complex governments or these people who are elite and do not contribute to their own subsistence. Basically, this is where it falls apart. The problem is, as soon as you get to a population over 200 people, it doesn't work anymore. Not at all. And some of it is because humans are lazy. Okay, I'll give you that. But a lot of it doesn't work because you can't get everyone to contribute the same way. Am I agreeing? Yeah, I don't know if you can hear it. Thanks. I couldn't. Thanks for letting me know. I received a text at the exact same time. So there we go. All right. Working with Friedrich Engels, Marx authors the famous book, the Communist Manifesto, right? And he says, okay, you have to organize workers. You must organize yourselves. Mayday, the labor organization, right? You do this organization so that you can rise up against the bourgeoisie, and of course it inspired a whole bunch of revolutions, and so far almost all the revolutions have failed because they really super oversimplified. Right? They really, communism was super oversimplified. He actually laid out a bunch of rules that have never been followed. And I've worked in communist countries, and in some ways they looked exactly like our own, and in other ways there were very different expectations. Then we get Max Weber. His name is not Weber, his name is Weber. He was an economist, so he's working in the late 1800s, and he was actually post-Marx in the sense that Marx was still alive for a little while, but that he was seeing the end result of this very serious industrial revolution. And what he was looking at was the topic of prestige, how that's conveyed, and life changes. So he was looking at the idea that certain classes of people had more prestige than others. He's also pretty famous for talking about the Protestant work ethic. That's where we get the idea of the Protestant work ethic is from him. So he says basically that even if you have individuals making the same amount of money, like you have a lawyer and a farmer, the lawyer has more prestige by the very type of job that he has. So he says that this prestige, of course, has a huge impact on your life. And it's going to affect what kind of cultural influence you have, and what kind of life chances you're going to have, what kind of opportunities you're going to have. I learned a very simplified version of this from my stepmom. She was like, if you want to marry a rich man, you have to be where rich men are. That's going to be your life chances. If you think about who you actually interact with, right? Cinderella is a great freaking story, but it just doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. So your class and your prestige are going to affect the kinds of things you have available to you in your life. Absolutely. So Weber says it's a lot more complicated than the access to the modes of production. There are these other components too. This is one of the reasons that in China everyone's referred to as comrade, right? Because everybody's then considered of equal prestige, and whether you're a doctor or whether you're a fish digger, you are equal. One of the reasons is persistent, one of the paths. So then we end up with Pierre Bourdieu. Here we go. I always have a problem with his name. Bourdieu. Okay. Read 3 books. I can't say his name. All right. So he's a French philosopher, and basically what he says is that the other issue is we have social reproduction of these ideas. So if you are the very thing I was talking to you about at the beginning of class, if you are middle class, you are born from middle class, regardless of whether or not you really are making that kind of money. He also really criticizes the idea that education is the gateway to social mobility. I'm sorry, it's really a horrible thing to teach a class. Like, hey, he's like, you study and you stay in school and you work hard and you get good grades, all these opportunities are going to be open to you and you'll have this ability to move up higher. And while that does happen, it is more the exception than the rule for many people. So why are you here? This is a little question. Well, you're here, of course, to educate yourself and grow so that when those opportunities do arrive, you learn to snatch them. But many of you are going to end up old people in your dark. It's reality. You're like, not me. I said, go for it. Be that. Pull yourself up, folks. So, I said it's really more about social reproduction than social mobility. You don't have as much up and down as you think you have. So you're just reproducing the same class. And so there's really 2 reasons for it. One is something called habitus, and the other is called cultural capital. So habitus is the idea that you're enculturated into this idea. You can almost think of it as the word habit. So if you learn about the world, you learn about your culture, and you figure out how you fit in the world. Your parents teach you this. So your personal identity comes from this. And it may be your identity is that you come from a backwater town, right? Or you come from a blue-collar family, or you come from royalty, or whatever it is. And these experiences themselves affect how you view your life. This is why people think the family you come from really still matters, even though we don't have a class-based society. Right? We recognize this on some level. Cultural capital is what resources your family had that they could draw upon. If you were born into a rich family, you have more resources. If you were born into an economically deprived family, you have less. If you were born into a rich family or a wealthy family, you could go to better schools. You had better access to nutrition. You have better opportunities. You also went to school with people who had those same opportunities. So you had more access to people who were either the children of people in power or the people who were becoming in power. So it sort of is self-perpetuating in that way. You get the social standing of the family you're in. But if you are in a different class of standing, right, if you do not have that, then you don't have the same access to resources. It's very, very similar to Weber's idea, but it perpetuates and it becomes the basis for U.S. political policy. And the Kennedys were, yeah, if you're a Kennedy, you're always a Kennedy, but what they're looking at really, what Trudeau's stuff ends up being is the basis for Lyndon Johnson's Culture of Poverty, the War on Poverty. You've all heard this, the War on Poverty. 1965, and it still persists today. So real quick in between, we'll look at life healing, and she says basically, okay, if we're going to look at class inequality, we also have to look at race and gender, because those things are also going to affect your life chances and form part of your class. So she was looking at the Harlem Birthright Project, and the Birthright Project was basically this. In Harlem, even though there were families of relatively high financial status, they had double the deaths at birth or within the first year of anywhere else in the country. Yeah, double those kids died as the rest of, actually the rest of New York and pretty much the rest of the country. And the reasons were, she thought, was about local living conditions, and that the really it was more about the personal prejudices that the African American, they were being essentially stressed out and having to work twice as hard to get half as far, and that ultimately hurt the infants. So you can't just look at class as a social standing, you also have to look at it as an economic standing, and this was all together intertwined. Just to kind of give you an idea of how we construct this, if you are in the top 5%, so you're considered wealthy, your household income range, and this is net, not gross, your household income range is $186,000. And that is, the number of households in the United States that have this is about 6 million. Top 20% are above 101,000, that's about 24 million households, et cetera, et cetera. Please look here that the bottom 60, the bottom middle 20, 420, bottom 20, so basically 60. Let's see, let's actually just go 80% of the nation makes less than 100,000. 20% of the nation makes less than 20,000. It's a lot. Right? So we actually end up with less than 1% of the population controls 95% of the law. What do they mean by the 99%? So when we look at ethnographic, oh, actually, sorry, we are almost done. We have, are we really almost done? Did I just look? No, we're not quite almost done. All right. We're going to have to come back to this idea because it's super important.